Well, after putting up an again franchise record 20 shots on goal in the first period of last night's game, in the second half of the back-to-back against the Kings, the Kraken only managed 22 in the entire game. But they still managed to score on 4 of them and win this game 4-1 over the Kings, coming away with 3 out of 4 points in the back-to-back and short road trip to start the season. And on top of that, for the first time in franchise history, they're over the hockey version of 500. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, and welcome back to Winning Kraken Hockey. For the second season in a row, it's the second game of the season that they find their first win in. This time coming on the second half of a road back-to-back, both happening around the city of LA. But before we jump right into the excitement of a Kraken win, there are a couple of things we found out before the game that we should probably mention. One of which was, of course, the fact that, as expected, Martin Jones got the start in the second half of a back-to-back. No, it's not Grubauer getting benched because he had a less than an ideal first game of the season. That's just how back-to-backs work. You don't start the same goaltender in both games, unless you really have no choice or it's the playoffs. The second thing, though, is where people might overreact a little bit more. That's the fact that the one-player difference, other than the goaltender, in this game from the last one, is that in this one, Morgan Geekie takes the ice for the Kraken instead of healthy scratch Shane Wright. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the Kraken have already given up on Shane Wright after also having pretty limited playing time in his first ever NHL game with just over 6 minutes in the game in Anaheim. It might have something to do with the fact that it's a back-to-back and it's his first time in the NHL, so just throwing him into 2 games of a back-to-back might not be what the team was looking for developing a teenager at the NHL level that is a core piece of this team's future. But again, it's not like he would be all that tired from just 6 minutes of playing, so it'll definitely be interesting to see what the Kraken plan for Shane Wright is going forward. Again, he didn't really have a ton of impact in last night's game, or I guess the game in Anaheim, although again, it's hard to do that with just 6 minutes of ice time. But I would expect to see him back in the lineup for the first game at home against Vegas. I mean, who knows? Maybe they were just limiting him in these 2 away games to start out the season so that they could make sure that he scores his first goal, or has the best chance to score his first goal in the NHL at home in front of the home crowd, much like what Matty Beniers did, and we all know how exciting that was. Also, on the Shane Wright front, it's probably worth mentioning that it's pretty likely that he'll play at least 10 games to burn the first year of his rookie contract, which sounds like a bad decision, but it's just kind of standard practice for high caliber rookies, like what they did with Beniers, making sure he got those games last season, and what they'll also do with Wright. But if they don't think that he's fully ready and are convinced that he's ready, they probably won't play him more than 40 games this season so that he doesn't burn a year of control by the team. It's just kind of some weird contract stuff, but he might play somewhere between 10 and 40 games. And if he plays more than 40, it's because he's a leading contributor for the Kraken right out of the gate in this first season. Could still take some time for that to happen, but it's something to watch for sure. As for the guys who actually did play in this game and how they got to that 4-1 win over the Kings, well, it didn't take us long into this game to find out what would turn out to be one of the main themes of this game. And that was the Kings in the box, as they get caught early on for too many men on the ice. A sloppy start for a team that just lost their opener to the Golden Knights. Just like that, the Kraken get a power play, which is something that after last night, or again the game in Anaheim, depending on when you're watching this, all of a sudden Kraken fans are actually excited to see. However, this first power play for the Kraken turns out to really look a lot like what we saw last season, as the Kings just shut the Kraken down at the blue line every time they try to enter, and prevent the Kraken from really getting set up at all, much less get a shot on goal. Fortunately for the Kraken, though, as this first power play comes to an end very unsuccessfully for them, the Kings, I guess, decided that they had so much fun killing off the Kraken power play and denying them at the blue line over and over again, that they decided to go right back to the kill as Lizotte heads to the box. And the Kraken, this time, well, they pretty much flip a switch from that first power play right into the second one, as they get right in the offensive zone, get set up, and start creating those chances and getting shot after shot on goal, like we saw them do in Anaheim. It takes a little while for it really to turn into much of anything other than some good saves for Quick, but eventually, with about 30 seconds left in the power play and that second unit out there, it's Burakovsky from the right dot firing it all the way across through the entire LA defense to Eberle on the far side, who gets a shot off, but an incredible save by Quick. However, the rebound goes out to Schwartz on the other side, and he puts it into the net to give the Kraken the early 1-0 lead. And of course, just as everyone expected coming into the season, another, now fourth, power play goal in 2 games. Unlike the game before against the Ducks, though, the Kings don't allow the Kraken to turn this power play goal into momentum, getting back to 5-on-5, and it's actually the Kings who start to press back. Fortunately, that's shut down by some good defensive work by Borgen. Though Borgen does get a little bit carried away, and at the end of it all, ends up getting an interference call, and he heads to the box, sending out a Kraken penalty kill unit that had a tough time in Anaheim, and it doesn't get better with this first kill. To start off this first kill for the Kraken, Geeky wins the face-off in the Kraken end, which also kind of turned out to be a theme with the Kraken kill tonight. However, his win face-off goes back to Alexiak, who tries to bounce it off the boards behind the net. It doesn't find another Kraken player. Instead, it finds Iafallo, who wraps it around and gets it into the net before Jones can react and get his foot to the post. And so, just 4 seconds into the kill, the Kings have tied things up. Following the Kings tying things up at 1 here on the power play, if it wasn't already obvious where this game was headed based on the fact there's already been 3 penalties and we're not even a third of the way through the first, this is where the second theme of this game really starts to come alive, and that was the physical, chippy nature of the game, as things get really physical and chippy between this and another Kings power play that happens just a couple minutes later. Susi laying a couple of big hits, and eventually ends up in the box for a second Kings power play. The good news, though, is that for the Kraken, as you may have figured out already from the final score, where the Kings only scored once and they'd already scored that goal, the Kraken are able to kill this power play off for the Kings pretty well. It's really, honestly, the best kill of the season so far for the Kraken. And then the rest of the first period, after a pretty eventful first half of it, is actually pretty uneventful, and it ends with just 14 shots on goal between the two teams. Again, after the Kraken had more than that themselves in the first period alone in the last game. Or, I should say it's almost entirely uneventful until the end, as there is one last big event that happens right at the end of the first, where a shot from up towards the blue line by the Kraken is batted down by Beniers in front of the goal. It hits the ice, gets past Quick, and into the goal to give Beniers another goal on the season. Or it would have, but it's immediately waved off for Beniers hitting it with a high stick. And well, I really hate to admit it because it was an incredible hand-eye or hand stick or whatever you want to call it play by Beniers that ends up getting this puck past Quick. Yeah, his stick was just above the crossbar of the goal, which is what the rule says. It's kind of a dumb rule that it applies to a guy standing wide open in the open ice with nobody around him, so there's no one to get hit by his stick, but either way, the rule's the rule, and unfortunately it takes a goal off the board for Beniers here. The second period starts much the same way that the first ended, really pretty uneventful, at least as far as offense is concerned, with neither team letting the other one get much of anything going offensively. Both teams really shutting down the blue line and not allowing the puck to get through into the offensive zone with any kind of control. It's a lot of just taking the puck out of your end, getting up to the blue line, trying to chip it past the other team. They get possession, they take it to the other blue line, they chip it in. It goes back and forth like that for a while, until eventually the Kraken, after chipping it in, do get to it along the boards. It's Borgen who gets to it first. He shovels it down along the boards to Tanev, who's waiting in the corner. Tanev gets the puck, and then just kind of decides to drive up towards the Kings net from behind, and gets a weird shot off, and it's in! He somehow just catches Quick off guard, as Quick just looked completely frozen by the play, almost looking at Tanev like he'd seen a ghost. And the puck, I don't know if it bounced off of a Kings player in front of the net, but it somehow does find its way in. And just like that, Turbo's on the board with his first of the season, and the Kraken have taken the 2-1 lead. And I'm sure that's something that will fire up Kraken fans to see. Number 13 back on the score sheet. Following Turbo's pretty nice goal here, regardless of how it ended up in the net, we get through the first half of the second period without any penalties. But that doesn't last much longer, as Gord ends up getting tripped up, stays with the play and gets a nice shot off. The shot is saved by Quick, but the Kraken do get another power play as the Kings find their way back into the box. And once again for the Kraken power play, I think at this point pretty much proving that it's no fluke, as this is the second time in a row at this point that they've done it against a pretty good team that a lot of people think might make the playoffs in the Kings, even in spite of what they did over and over against the Ducks the game before. The Kraken power play gets set up in the offensive zone and just starts creating scoring chances and taking shots off on net. Unfortunately, none of those shots end up really finding the back of the net during the power play. They still are, though, creating a lot of different looks and not being predictable like we saw last season, where it seemed like it was just the same thing over and over again. Slow passing, as we've been over I don't know how many times, and trying to get it to one player so he can just hit it off the ice without even really much of a one-time or anything like that. But now this Kraken power play, and I think Eddie Olczyk did pretty much hit it on the head on the broadcast, is creating all sorts of different scoring chances from all sorts of different looks and different passing combinations, which are quick and decisive. Again, the exact opposite of what we saw last year. Either way, again, this power play doesn't end up finding the back of the net during the power play, as I alluded to, but as the power play is coming to an end and we hear the loud stick taps of Martin Jones on the other end signaling that it's about to end to the guys on the ice who aren't looking at the clock, obviously, Beniers circles with the puck one more time and fires off a last-second shot right out to Wennberg, and he shovels it in between Quick's legs and into the net to give the Kraken a not power play goal, but kind of power play goal. I mean, the fifth guy just put his first skate on the ice, so it's effectively a power play goal, even though it doesn't look like that on the score sheet. Either way, it's 3-1 Kraken at this point, and it's starting to look pretty good. Oh, and yes, although he did have his goal taken off of the board at the end of the first, again, rightly based on the rules, Beniers does end up getting an assist on this power play goal for Wennberg, which means that he maintains his status as a point-per-game player in the NHL, now 12 games in. So now, with the Kraken up 3-1 late in the second against a Kings team who's staring down the barrel at an 0-2 start to their season, if you thought things were chippy before, it only gets worse from here. The Kings definitely start to ramp up the aggression, and to be fair, they do kind of take control of the rest of the second period. Weirdly, outside of the power play that they end up getting, which Seattle gets the better scoring chance on, it's a Koolman breakaway that he just can't quite wrap around the toe of Quick to get it into the goal. However, the theme of the physicality and chippiness of this game really shines through a little bit more in what caused that power play in the first place. It's Alexiak in the Kraken defensive zone who ends up taking a bit of a run at Lizotte and gets called for an illegal check. And then just as the whistle is blown to send Alexiak to the box, with Lemieux hounding Alexiak for that hit on Lizotte, Alexiak just kind of lays Lemieux onto the ice with a single punch to the head. Lemieux crumples to the ground, and fortunately for Alexiak, he doesn't get called for a second penalty for that punch. Still, it's a bit of a bold choice by Alexiak to put his hand near the mouth of Lemieux, considering Lemieux's history from last season, but either way, it's just the 2 minutes the Kraken end up having to kill off, and like I said, they get the better chance in those 2 minutes and kill it off well. Eventually, we do end up getting to the end of the second without too many more shenanigans anyway, and with the score still 3-1 Kraken. Now at this point, going into a third period with a multiple goal lead, or even getting a multiple goal lead early on in the third period, you'd probably feel pretty good about your team's chances of winning the game. Unless maybe you're a Leafs fan, but the Kraken did just blow a multiple point lead late in the third just the night before. So yeah, this is definitely one the Kings could still come back in. And to be fair, they do kind of try in the first few minutes of the third, but Jones is putting up a brick wall in net for the Kraken. At which point, the Kings decide, you know what, screw trying to come back in this game, we're just going to try to exercise some frustration and get our pound of flesh out of it. And to be fair, the Kraken make it pretty easy for them to find reasons to take out frustration, as the Kraken keep just laying Kings players on the ice. It's Soucy along the boards with a big hit that is followed by, as he's looking away from the play, Larson getting slashed in the back of the legs by Doughty, an absolutely cowardly slash by Doughty that puts Larson on the ice. He ends up taking a short trip to the locker room, as he was actually originally called for a flopping, I guess, but since he's helped off the ice and ends up going to the locker room for a short bit, the penalty to Larson is waved off, so it's just Doughty to the box and the Kraken to the power play. This Kraken power play is brought to an end pretty shortly, and unfortunately not because they score a goal, but because Dunn has to hook a Kings player to prevent a 2-on-1 break going the other way. So it ends up being 4-on-4, where Jones still has to make a couple of big saves in that period of time, but it all ends up coming up empty. And then shortly after, the Kraken are going to get another chance on the power play, as the Kings just cannot stay out of the box at this point in the game. So much so that right after the faceoff, Beniers gets a good look and then gets interfered with, so it's another Kings player to the box, and the Kraken are going to get basically 2 minutes of 5-on-3. Which you'd think would be a basically guaranteed goal with how this power play has been playing, but they kind of go with a weird strategy of having 2 of the 5 guys behind the net, 1 on either side, rather than 4 or 5 guys in front of it with that 2-man advantage, and only 1 of the 5 out in front of the net that's in the middle of those 3 Kings players. So they kind of just end up squandering it by trying to get a little bit too cute. I don't really know how else to say it. Not long after, the Kraken surprisingly and disappointingly squander that 5-on-3 opportunity, which is actually kind of nice to say, considering it may not have been all that surprising if it had happened last season. But either way, after the 5-on-3 is wasted, as the Kraken head back to their defensive zone on a back check, as that's where the puck is headed, it's once again Doughty with a pretty lazy defensive series where he just kind of stood next to the net, waits for Bjorkstrand, who's behind the net, to turn around and head back towards his end of the ice, and Doughty kind of goes for a clothesline on Bjorkstrand with his stick. It's not seen by the officials, and he wasn't quite as emphatic with his stick clothesline as he was slashing Larson in the back of the leg, but still another really questionable choice by Doughty. And look, I get that this is the kind of thing that happens, especially when games get chippy, that guys get a little bit loose with their stick here and there. But honestly, at this point, Doughty's just skating around swinging his stick at any Kraken player that'll get near him like, "Leave me loose, but I'm taking one of you with me." Regardless though, eventually the Kings go empty net with just under 3 minutes left in the game. Not too long into that, Tanev gets called for another penalty, so the Kings are going to get a couple minutes of 6-on-4 with the net still empty. And about a minute and a half into that, Larson finds the empty net to get his first of the season, and to give the Kraken that 4th point of the game to make it 4-1, where it would stay. That didn't stop things from continuing to get even more physical as the last couple minutes of this game tick down. Eventually, it's who else but Lemieux that, surprise, surprise, fails to hold his composure as the Kings are losing a game, and he goes after Gord. Gord initially declines the fight for good reason. Lemieux, again, is known for trying to eat people on the ice, but eventually Lemieux, with some help of Gord, of course, being a little bit of the irritant that he is, doesn't give Gord a choice and just goes right after Gord anyway. Doesn't really get much out of Gord other than a big grin as Lemieux's escorted off the ice. And Gord also ends up having to leave the game because he also gets a minor for fighting. And then as the final whistle blows, the Kraken win the game 4-1. A couple of Kings players go after a couple of Kraken players. It's Donato and Borgen, though, who both get jumped and both get the better of the Kings players that went after them. And, yeah, that's just kind of how the night went. The Kraken get the better of the Kings in pretty much every way. I did see some people on Twitter wondering if maybe this could be the start of the first true rivalry for the Kraken, or at least an opponent that feels like that rival that you just always hate playing, or maybe love to hate playing, whatever you want to call it. And while it's certainly pretty early to call anything a rivalry for the Kraken, they'd have to prove themselves to be more than a contender for a first overall pick before that happens. This is definitely the type of game early on in the season, this kind of physical, chippy game that could turn into a rivalry as this season goes along, and they face the Kings at least 2, I think 3 more times over the course of the season. We'll have to wait and find out how those games go and how much more of this carries over into those games. I would certainly expect to see a little bit of it, at least in the next one. Plus, it's also probably worth mentioning that rivalries do kind of have a tendency to be born in the playoffs, or at least exacerbated in the playoffs, if nothing else. And all I'm going to say is one of these teams after 2 games has 3 points, and the other has 0. So they both have to make it there. As for the Kraken 3 stars of the game, the first star, it's gotta be Martin Jones. He has 26 saves and a .935 36 or 63 save percentage. I'll put it up here or somewhere, whatever he did. He had a good night, gets the Kraken the first win. It is worth the mentioning before people jump all over, make Jones the starter, Grubauer's the backup, get that bum out of here. The defense in front of Jones was considerably better than the defense in front of Grubauer in game one, but Jones made some pretty big saves to keep this game just a one-goal game for the Kings. As for my second Kraken star of this game, I'm going to go a little bit off of the board of what some people might expect. I'm going to go with Will Borgen. Borgen, of all of the players, I thought had the biggest physical impact in this one, between him and Susie anyway. The two of them laid some big hits really throughout the course of this game, and especially as things started to get more and more physical in that third period, where Borgen especially laid maybe the biggest hit of the game, other than Alexiak's punch to Lemieux anyway, where he laid Kempe flat out on his back in open ice in the Kraken defensive zone, which seemed like a statement at that point in the game for sure. On top of that, though, he also played really well defensively, and did get the assist on that Tanev goal as he shuffled it along the boards to Tanev in the corner, and then Tanev did the rest. And for the third star, I really wanted to not be boring here and give some sort of fun answer of a guy that we're not going to see constantly the 3 stars over the course of the season, maybe like Jaden Schwartz, although he just barely wasn't the 3rd star in the last game, or maybe even Susie, who again was another big physical presence in this one. Or I actually also considered Wemberg, who had a pretty good game and a goal in this one. But in the end, we're being honest, the 3rd star has to go to Matty Beniers. He's going to end up being in these stars constantly. It might just be 2 stars plus Beniers at the rate he's going. But again, he gets the assist, a couple of really good scoring opportunities, and also had that one that was just a couple of inches of stick above, crossbar level from being a really nice hand-eye coordination to give the Kraken the 2-1 lead going into the end of the first. But yeah, the way this guy's playing, also some really good defensive plays as well. He straight up stopped a breakaway chance for the Kings, either in the first or early in the second. So doing it at both ends of the ice for Beniers. And finally, since I closed out the last video with that fun fact about players that scored in their Kraken debut, on this one with a little bit of a fun fact of the Kraken now have 8 goals on the season, and they've all come from different players. So unfortunately, that does mean that nobody is still on pace for an 82-goal season, but I don't think we were necessarily expecting that from anybody, outside of maybe Beniers. I mean, we weren't really expecting it from Beniers, just kind of hoping for it. Either way, 8 goals for the Kraken so far, 8 different players, and a lot of offense that we weren't expecting, even if they don't put up another 48 shots in this one. A lot better defense, though, and if we're being honest, better goaltending, but Grubauer will get a redemption chance at home. With that, though, I'd love to hear your thoughts of this game down in the comment section below. First one of the season for the Kraken, and a back-to-back 2-game road trip to start the season that the Kraken end up getting 3 of 4 points in. Sure, but again, it would have been nice to get that 4th point in Anaheim, where they definitely probably should have won that game, but still a pretty good road trip that they end up coming home to. And that home opener against Vegas should be a fun one. Until then, though, as always, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you have liked or enjoyed this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel, so I appreciate you using them. And until Vegas, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, go Kraken.